Hey, Deliberate Leaders. I am your host, Allison Dunn, founder of the Deliberate Leaders podcast, bringing you inspiring interviews to help you on your leadership journey. Today, our guest is Scott Fritz. He is an entrepreneur, an angel investor, a business coach, and a public speaker. He is the author of one of my favorite books, The 40-Hour Work Year. He teaches business owners how to become passive investors in their own businesses. Scott, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Awesome. I like to kick off my my podcast episodes with a quick, deliberate conversation. And I love to ask, what is your number one leadership tip that you would like to give our audience today?
Yeah, that's a great question. And in my business coaching with some of my clients, obviously we go over leadership techniques and templates and things like that. And I always remind the groups I'm working with, which are usually entrepreneurs, but sometimes they're next level managers or C-level managers or executives. The number one role of a leader is to develop more leaders. And I in my own experience, in my own life, in my own businesses, I found that when I started to really embrace that and stop being the yes guy and the answer guy and the ego guy, like a lot of entrepreneurs are, and worked on developing other leaders and coaching other leaders. Wow. I mean, not only was my company running better, but everybody in the company was more energized and having fun, hitting their goals.
Yeah, I love that. I think one of the challenges that sometimes I think that people who we're developing don't always look at themselves as a leader. And so the quicker we can have them see themselves, and that is key. So
yep.
I want to start our interview today actually by having you share a little bit about your story or your own story. So in 1997, you founded Human Capital. And what did that company specialize in?
Yeah, so we were a professional employer organization. It's known as a PEO, but we outsourced for entire HR departments for companies. Usually our client size was 30 to 100 employees, but we had some 400 and 500 person companies. We became the outsourced HR department. So we did all the payroll, HR, handbooks, all the administrative junk of business, I like to say, from a standpoint of staying in compliance with the never-ending burden of employment regulations.
What did you learn from growing your company? Because you were able to sell it, correct?
Yeah. Yep.
So what were some of your biggest learnings from your growth?
Yeah, well, and I talk a lot about this in the book, as an entrepreneur early on, especially, I was just about to turn 30 when I started my business. And although I thought I knew a lot, obviously I didn't know much. I came from big corporate America, working for PepsiCo and other big companies. And although they trained me on good management skills, leading people, which you already asked about leading and challenging people to really take the next step was something that I learned early on, fortunately, because as I talk about in my book, I had what I call my mirror moment, which was basically a nervous breakdown, if you will. And I realized if I kept going like this, my body was telling me to knock it off, and I needed to get people around me that were better. And people talk about this all the time, hire people better than you in specific skill sets and areas of the business that there was not enough hours in the day. So it was really not any magical lesson. It was that, when you get the right people and they have the right mindset and they're aligned with your culture, like I'm sure you talk about a lot, your business, it's pretty much unstoppable, other than, a pandemic or,
right.
Other things we can't control. I talk about in the book, 9/11 happened while I had my company, and that was a major, major setback for us for a few months. So.
Right. So I believe you sold it in 2007, right? Which I think is fortuitous in the sense of it was right before the next, big financial crisis that we had.
Yeah.
So timing was quite impeccable, honestly.
Yeah.
How did you know or recognize that it was the right time to sell?
Well, and this is something that I'm sure you hear this all the time, but entrepreneurs, and unfortunately I had a lot of friends who were entrepreneurs who I'd say the G word was getting in the way, greed, and they probably should have exited about that time. But we actually started looking at selling middle 06. So it took us 18 months. We had a plan around it. It wasn't triggered by any one or two things, but My CPA, who our CPA firm was, I like to say, more of an advisor and a coaching firm than just a bookkeeping company or an accounting company. His name's Steve. He came to me at lunch in '06 and said, hey, things are heating up in your space. We're looking at pretty good valuations. I've got a couple of PE firms that would like to come in, let you and your business partner take some chips off the table and then grow it and go public and or acquire the companies. And I was already living at the time the 40-hour work year. And so my business partner and I, Karen, talked about this. I said, I really don't want to get back in and grow this again. I kind of did that, but I'm willing to sell if you are. So that's what kicked it off, was the timing of the valuations and the interest of the markets in buying our type of entity. So.
Could you give me sort of a high-level overview of the 40-hour work year book?
Okay. So again, it's my story. I kind of have some fun in the beginning. I talk about when I was a kid and I grew up in an entrepreneurial family and had a bunch of small little, businesses selling candy and doing all kinds of stuff, selling, cutting wood and selling it, and basically a young entrepreneurial kid. And the book then transitions pretty quickly into my story of my company, which was Human Capital. And it's over a 4-year span, which is 2004 to 2007, which is when I worked really less than 40 hours a year. The company was running itself. So I spent a little bit of time in the first part just giving a background of my company and how we got to where we were, some of my major stumbles and mess ups, as I just talked about, having my nervous breakdown. And then the meat of the book, about 80% of the book, is how did I transition myself and the business into a passive investment for me as an owner, not something where I had to go in there and make the donuts every day. And then the exit, which is, I don't talk about the exit other than the company, because of how we set it up, was positioned perfectly to exit, because I talk about the ownership paradox in the book, which basically I believe is true, where the less involved the owner is in the business, the more valuable it is.
So I think everyone that I coach that's a business owner, that's the ultimate goal, right? Is to be a passive investor inside of your business. What are some of the key takeaways that any business owner or future business owner that's thinking about growing a company, like what do we need to be thinking about today and as we're building it?
And so, and again, it's one of my favorite sayings, begin with the end in mind. So when I meet a business owner for the first time and they're saying, well, I'd like to get to where you're at, I said, well, what is the end for you? My book isn't about selling your business. That's what I did. My book is about setting up your business so that you can sell it if you want to. So if you want to set up an evergreen business or an ATM type company, or you want to set up something that can be handed down to your children or family, or you do want to exit, I believe every business should be built and structured the same way. And this is basically around systems. So, entrepreneurs, I do my talk. If I want the room to go to sleep or leave, I say we're going to talk about systems and we're going to talk about training. That's most entrepreneurs. That's why they're entrepreneurs. They don't like that stuff. And so the way we really got to where we did and the way the business was running was we put the time and effort and got everybody involved in building the SOPs, or standard operating systems, standing operating procedures, to build the company to run without us. It's like eMyth. I'm sure you've talked about, it's a franchise model. And every business, I believe, can be built to run pretty much by itself, meaning with the teams that you put in place. You don't have to have the owner in there.
So you use the term ownership paradox. Can you explain why that is so important?
So I saw that graph. It was, I don't remember. I wish I would have, we didn't have iPhones back then. I wish I would have taken a picture of it. That's my business. I sold my business the year the iPhone came out. That's how long ago. But the guy did this graph, and it's 2 arrows that cross in the middle. And basically the up arrow is the value of your company, and the down arrow is the owner working in the business, not on the business, in the business. Work on the business all you want. Like, you got to get out of working in the business. For example, when I had my nervous breakdown, basically panic attack, I was the sales guy because I thought I had to sell everything, and it was killing me. So the ownership paradox says, as you move down working in the business, the other arrow up, it dramatically increases the value of your business. And as I talk about when I do my talk to Vistage groups and EO groups and other people like that, is the real power of that image, though, is not that you figured it out. It's going back and showing your team, hey, everybody, let's work on getting me down off this in the business arrow as far as possible, so that the value of the company will go up, because it's not only the owners that benefit when you're working in a more valuable company. Everybody benefits. You can pay more, you can bonus more, you can do more 401k, you can offer stock options. I mean, if you're struggling to make payroll every week because you're so much in the business, nobody's benefiting.
I know that SOPs does put an entire room to sleep, so I am with you. However, you've outlined a really great 9-step process for developing them. Can you just kind of on a high level share some of the steps that are involved in having us develop great SOPs?
Yeah, and I write that was the most onerous thing I've ever done in business, and it truly was. Good news is now, I mean, you've got great, platforms out there. I mean, I constantly sing the praises of a platform called trainual.com, shameless plug, but Chris Ronzio, who started that company, was a coaching client of mine for a few years and started Trainual, and I get almost all my clients to use it now. But the basic, most difficult part of the SOPs, especially for entrepreneurs, is they're not going to set aside the time that it takes to really document these things. So as I talk about in the book, I mean, we had our managers of each department documenting in 15-minute intervals during the course of a day for 2 weeks, every single thing they were doing. And the scary thing is, as you're aware, I'm sure, or a sad thing is, there was a lot of dead time in there, right? There's a lot of, here's what we did for 7 minutes and then nothing for 12, right? And so that was part of what we needed to do. We're like, okay, we're moving around in a lot of different ways and doing a lot of different things that aren't necessarily going to help us grow the business. So we would take all that documentation, we would sift through it with the managers, the executive team would sift through it with the managing department heads, focus it, make it better, take it back, implement that, do it again for 2 weeks, do it again for 2 weeks, etc. It took us around 9 months from the beginning to the end of getting all of that documented. And again, this was Excel, Word, on the intranet. I mean, it was nothing like is out there now. I mean, there were no mobile apps or anything like that. And so if you had to make a change, say in finance, that would affect HR and sales, you had to have somebody go in and physically change the SOP in each area of the documentation, which now it all cross references and updates automatically with the new platforms out there. I mean, I would have been great to have that.
I think there's kind of a myth around not all businesses need SOPs. We're not big enough to, need SOPs. At what size of a company do you start writing standard operating procedures?
Another great question. I recommend you do it right out of the bat. It's a lot easier to do it in the beginning when you do have some bandwidth and still have some of that creativity in you, because you're not just making the donuts all the time. But we were, and again, people have asked me this, we were probably around 20 people, I would say, internally. Now we had systems and SOPs already. Each department had stuff they were working, but it had not been put into a corporate SOP binder and online system. Well, again, it wasn't online, it was in the office, but we hadn't got it to where it was a holistic system that could be replicated from A to B to Z when you brought somebody in-house. And one of the main reasons we did this is I hadn't really totally started transitioning out of the company yet, but we started getting operations in multiple states. So when we sold the company, we had clients in 42 states. So when you have 23 entities spread over 42 states, when you have that complex of a system and they're not uniform, consistent SOPs that are being integrated at each spot, you're setting up a mess. I mean, it's going to turn out ugly. So that's kind of what got us to really go in that step. And then what it also really did, which is the outcome of this, is that we now had a way to train people consistently, correctly, over and over and over again. It wasn't, Missy's not in the office today, so she can't train you. No, it was, here's the SOP. You don't need a person. You have a system, like the saying, right? Don't hire people to run the company, hire people to run the systems. So
I think the takeaway I want to make sure that our listeners is that it feels like it's a big effort, but it actually saves you a tremendous amount of time once you have documentation done. And I want to go back. You said a shameless plug for one of your clients that is an online platform, Trainual.
Trainual, yeah. So it's a training and manual, trainual.com, trainual.com.
Awesome. I'll
And
make sure I put that in the show notes so that people can get a link to that too. That's super cool.
yeah, and Chris Ronzio, great guy. Again, I met him through Accelerator. I used to facilitate in Arizona. He's in Phoenix. Now he's in EO. And I did his strategy session this last fall. And, he's building a great team. They just brought on Remax as a national client using Trainual and the whole Remax system. So it's fun to see entrepreneurs, killing it. So
absolutely. One of the other skills that you teach is a decision matrix, or how to use a decision matrix. So first, can you explain to the listeners what that is, and then how you recommend company owners use it?
Yeah, so decision matrix, and again, I don't know how many talks I've done now, but it is universally the one tool in the book from a feedback standpoint that I get from people months, years later. They email me that they took and used in their business and saw a dramatic change. So the whole concept is, before you start building your SOPs and your training systems, we did this. I believe I tell people you should do this. You should build a decision matrix. So decision matrix at the company level is usually around 40 to 60 line items of things that have to have decisions made on them, meaning a signature in most cases, on a weekly, monthly, quarterly, annual basis. So things like changes to your 401k, things like changing compensation structures, changing bonus structures, settling litigation, all those kinds of things, purchases, vendor approvals, all that stuff is documented on the left-hand side. And then across the top in columns are the different people who need to sign off. So in our company, we had owner, CEO, CFO, department head, and then manager. And so in that line item, if you're looking across to the right, there's an X in the box of each person that needs to sign off and or be involved in the approval or decision that needs to be made. So I use the 401k as an example. Karen and I, still when we sold the company, we only had 7 X's out of 48 of the whole box. We only had 7, and one of them was 401k. But behind the scene, behind the picture of that X, was a simple one-line item thing Karen and I had to do. We were fiduciary on the 401k because we were the owners. We had to sign the 5500 form. So even though I have an X in that box, it was literally a 5-second SOP once a year because I had to sign the 5500 as fiduciary of the 401k. So it sounds very minute and granular, but when you have that clarity equals power. When you have that clarity of the decision matrix, and when we were first working this through, it is tough to get it going, but once you get it going, it's pretty sweet. I used to say to people, well, why are you touching that box? You don't have an X in there. As my youngest daughter used to say, get out of my sandbox, get out of my junkyard, stay out of my box. So it's a visual and systematic way to explain to somebody, look, you don't have to be in that meeting. You don't have to get on that call. You don't have to sit in and thumb through the documents. You don't have an X in that box. And again, I want to say, and you know this very well, you have to have the right kind of people for this system to work. So,
right.
A lot of times people aren't that keen on being that in line with what the systems are and how it should be done. So you need a certain mindset to make this work, but it works. I mean, there's no doubt about it.
I can speak to when trying to put a decision matrix in place when there's been no accountability or responsibility held within a team or within a whole organization, it does become more difficult because people are very protective of their sandbox areas and being able to attend that meeting even though they don't have a role in that meeting. So
so one of my favorite formulas is ownership plus measurement equals accountability.
Mm-hmm.
So the decision matrix, that is what it is to a T. It's ownership, who owns it, and what's the measurement. And the measurements behind the decision matrix, each line item had SOPs to explain how that approval method was going to be carried out, which was the measurement piece. And to your point, when you have ownership and you have measurement, you can have accountability.
On the creation of a decision matrix, you brought it down to but you had the X in the box because it was something that you just needed to sign the form. How big would a typical organization's decision matrix be? Is it a page? Is it 50 pages? What would it look like?
Sorry, I didn't quite hear that first part of the question.
Like how comprehensive should a decision matrix be for a company?
Oh yeah, great question. So one of my larger clients are about 400 employees. They've got several offices, several levels of management. Their corporate decision matrix, which is again all I talk about in the book from a visual standpoint, ours was 48. I think they have 55 or 60, but it doesn't necessarily mean bigger company has more. I've got companies that are bigger than mine that have 35 line items. But the next level is then each department had its own decision matrix, and those were 15 to 20 line items. So sales department had the decision matrix, HR, payroll, finance. So the company as a whole for us was 48. The department ones were typically 15 to 20.
Okay. All right.
And you're getting more tactical as you move down the organization, obviously.
Okay. That makes sense. Thank you.
Yep.
One of the other things that I wanted to touch on today was where people fit into the building process. So you teach CEOs how to develop a people plan. How do you define a people plan and what's involved?
And I think we kind of touched on this earlier, but I got sidetracked, which is normal. I've got the shiny penny syndrome, like all of us do. But so with the first thing when I go to somebody, I say, okay, do you have, we're talking about people plan here to move yourself more out of the business. Do you have that right-hand person, right-hand man or woman that literally they're 80% of you? I talk about the 80% rule. They're 80% or more of you. So you can go on at least a 2-week vacation and the building doesn't burn down. I mean, the business is still running. Okay. Yes, I've got that person. Okay, great. Now, do you have what I call an executive team or a leadership team, or a team that you have overseeing each department? So for us, it was 5 department heads, with Seth, who was my CEO, and then Karen and myself were founders. So there were 8 total, if you looked at it that way, but Seth, the 5 reported to him. So typically when I start working with a company or talking to a company, they haven't built out that executive team yet, or it's missing a couple of key people. So that's usually where we have to start that people plan process. I am a huge advocate for promoting from within. I went and got my sales guy from another company, but pretty much everybody else in our company started with us and grew up throughout the company. So that's a key thing. I think when you have that culture of, when we would post a job opening, yes, we went out, and again, this is before, the stuff we have now, before we post an ad, and we would open up interviews to anybody inside the company that was qualified. So that was a great way to build that culture of, hey, we can grow this together if you want to be a part of it. So you get that right-hand person, you got the executive team in place, and now you start creating their own teams under their departments. So each of our managers, directors would have their own small team. Typically, like finance, I think they had 8 people. So there'd be 2 key, controller, assistant controller, plus the CFO. Payroll, there were 3 managers. I think there were 16 people in the payroll department. 3 or 4 managers plus the department head. And all you're doing, it's just like a sports analogy. You're just grooming that next team that's going to move up in the organization should somebody get promoted and or leave. I mean, people quit or left or moved or whatever. And building that bench. Very few, I'm sure you see this, very few entrepreneurially led companies have a bench. And it's that hit by the bus into the tunnel conversation, right?
Right.
And that key person, the golden child syndrome, I call it, the golden child who had everything in their brain, didn't document it and didn't build a team. Yeah. And now they're moving to Hawaii. And guess what? You're starting from scratch. So I don't know if that totally answers your people plan, but that's the basic layout of how we look at it.
So key, find your right person first, I think, is where it starts, and then build your executive team around that. I love having people who think like owners, so intrapreneurs who are on your team. How can business owners identify people who also think that way? What is the core thing that you look for?
Yeah, well, I again talked about in the first of my book. It's amazing to me how many people did have little businesses or small businesses, grade school, junior high, high school, but whatever, they got a degree in another area, or unfortunately they were directed by maybe family members or people who didn't think they could be entrepreneurial, and so they never did it, and or they just don't have that lack of fear of jumping off the cliff and putting everything to risk like entrepreneurs do. But if they had that experience and or they have had that experience when they were younger, or even maybe during their time in the world, in the business world, that was a big key for me. Seth, who ended up running my company for me, he had a lot of background in his earlier years before he got, he was an attorney. So before he got his law degree, and having his own little businesses, he had a fishing business, he had a tour business on the lakes up in Michigan. So he had that ownership mindset. He understood what that looked like. And you're right. I'm in several angel investments deals, and some of the people we have as investors in those come from an employee mindset. And this may only be their first time or second time getting in as an investor. And that can be some of the toughest conversations, is switching them from that employee mindset to the owner mindset. Hey, there's not going to be a distribution this month. Okay. Things didn't go so well. What do you mean? I mean, the employee mindset of, I'm still going to get my check no matter what. Go take out another loan. Let's just make sure I get paid. No. Owner mindset. You get paid last if there's money at the end of the month or week or whatever. So,
I know that not all business owners want to foster a entrepreneur mindset, which I understand, I get. How do you, so assuming that maybe that's not a thing for them, how do you get people to step up when they don't have that built in?
Well, and again, so if you're owning the company, when I was owning the company, it was pretty simple. For example, on the executive team, we really had to have that entrepreneur mindset. All right. And as you know, as you go through the organization, and again, a lot of it's just experience, right? They're young, they're just out of college. They don't have that they haven't really even thought of that yet. And, or they didn't have that experience. And quite honestly, at some level, you want people that are just going to make the donuts. I mean, somebody's got to love being on the phone every day, running the payroll, because we were running payrolls. I mean, if all they wanted to do was create a new service offering every day and didn't want to run the payrolls, which I would call more of an on the business, they wouldn't fit in that position anyway. Typically, when I'm working with the company as a client, it's a tough conversation. I work with the executive team and the owner. If I haven't had a chance to talk to or do a pre-call with the team before I do a session, and I find out during the session there's a couple of people in there that are just more, status quo, let me work my hours, get my days off. I mean, I just have an honest conversation with the owner. I actually have had situations where at lunch, at the break, the owner went and talked to the person and they said, yeah, I don't think this is for me. And they left the meeting. Most times I haven't really ever seen it be really confrontational, because you can feel the reluctance from the person just as much as you can feel the frustration from the owner. And it's having that conversation, right? I mean, how many times have we just sat down and talked to our people? We could get a lot of this stuff taken care of. It doesn't need to get nasty. I mean, it really doesn't. So in my case, I don't know that you can make somebody entrepreneurial. I think you can give them the tools, and if they have the mindset, you can coach them in that direction. But we changed out 4 different people on our executive team over 4 years, and really it was around mindset. It wasn't around performance.
I do. I think that sometimes people just need. They may have been in a culture that didn't really appreciate that type of mindset, and so a lot of people just need to be encouraged to step forward and lean in and take on some of the risk and decision making on that.
And I think in a practical sense, or in a actual, to your point, I think about when you're doing reviews and performance reviews for your people, that needs to be a very open, it's become popular now, the 360 review and that sort of thing, a very open conversation type review, not a, Scantron, you got a 5 out of 7 or a 7 out of 10, or you're a 4.3. What does that mean, right? It needs to be, here's how you've done under your job description. Here's some of the stretch goals that we put out there. Here's how you did there. What do you see as your next phase in development in the company? Because when you start getting people to think about, wow, I can really develop myself in this company. I don't have to stay at this level if I don't want to. That's the true, what I call entrepreneurial mindset, as close as you're going to get. And some companies do it with, stock options and shares and other kinds of things. But and you hear this on, surveys, pay and compensation is always 4 and 5 out of the top 10. I never found it was that. I mean, yes, of course you got to pay somebody and reward them for what they're doing. But if they're not challenged and you're not giving them an opportunity to rise, I mean, that's back before I started my business. That's why I always left my employer. There was no advancement opportunity.
Right.
So.
Yeah, and I think that's a very important point that as business owners, as we're building our business, we have to look for opportunities to build everyone underneath us to all boats rise, right?
Yep.
In selling your company, what was the most important metric that you needed to track in order to achieve the goal? So you set out to sell it in 2006. When did you know where you were ready, and what metric were you tracking?
Yeah, so I talk about metrics in the book, and I said, they're like a perfect recipe if you're into cooking. So sometimes you got to tweak a couple of the measurements to really get that feedback you need on the area of the business you're looking at. So our number one metric, and I believe you should have a top 5 metrics for your business. The departments can have their own metrics, but again, much like the decision matrix, you can have the company overlying ones. Top 5 for the company, our number one by far, and I believe this is kind of universal in most businesses, you just measure it differently, was gross margin per worksite employee. So in my business, what that meant is a worksite employee would be my client's employee. So if I had to take Steve Slay's count, 30 employees, those 30 employees would be called worksite employees under my worksite employee umbrella. So we had about 6,000 worksite employees when we sold. In that scenario, Steve's company would count as 30 of the 6,000. So my gross margin per worksite employee per client, and then as a whole aggregate. And when I cracked that nut, that metric, I restructured everything in the business from a compensation standpoint. I restructured the sales compensation because I was paying them to just get the deal done, not what margin was it bringing into the company. I reset the bonus and the performance incentive structure for all departments because margin per worksite employee, at least in our industry, touched every single piece of the business. And I think that's the most difficult part of strong metrics, is making sure that everybody in entrepreneurship mindset can touch that metric and have an impact on it. Because if it's just a sales metric only, or it's just HR or just finance, it's really hard to get that collaboration between all the departments.
Would you say that is a metric that if I were to hand you any other type of industry, you could go, yeah, that's similar, but it's this instead? I mean, we could look at I ran an engineering firm, and our metric was billable hours. Mm-hmm. We had a certain average efficiency on our billable hours metric that we matched. Everyone could contribute to that in some way.
Correct.
So I think that's great.
Yeah, gross margin. So in the gross margin extra, this is another thing. So something I just don't think there's a lot. I mean, there is in certain circles, but in an entrepreneurial education circles, there aren't a lot of conversations around this. Number one, it's pricing and margin calculation for your services or products. And 2 is compensation structure for your teams. Everybody likes to talk, no offense, but everybody likes to talk about leadership and strategy. I'm the strategy guy, and that's all the fun stuff. But if you spend some time on those 2 areas, what I call just turning the dial a little bit in the business, you can see some incredible margins. I mean, I had a client, and they had 13 or 14 different services they layered that they were offering. And what they thought the top 3 were like middle to the bottom in margin. And they'd never done that analysis before. So by just totally shifting, in some cases, just getting rid of even 4 or 5 of the services, you can raise, bottom line without doing anything on the top line. But that's again, it's not for everybody because there's sacred cows there, right? So you get people like, what do you mean we're going to get rid of staffing? Staffing is our number one. Oh, really? It cost us $2 million last year. Well, they don't want to get rid of staffing because they're in charge of staffing. So, there's a balance.
I just put out an email today. Key performance indicators, KPIs, were a part of our focus for July because margin is a very important thing to be thinking about in an economy and what we're going through right now as a nation. So I put out 99 KPIs, and just all listeners, the 2 he just mentioned are the 2 most important. So you can throw the other 97. Just turn the dial on those 2. I may do a follow-up email. I'll give you a total shout out for saying these are the 2 that Scott. Okay.
Cool. Yeah.
So speaking of KPIs, what is your favorite tracking tool to keep track of metrics such as that?
And again, I personally don't have a favorite. Trainual has that ability built in. So what's been cool, and again, I'm not bragging. There's other. So they just won an award though. I think again, I don't track this stuff because I'm not in that world, but they just won like the best SOP tracking training platform out of 400 that were tested or something like that. I don't know. I gave them a thumbs up on LinkedIn. I don't remember what the award was, but Chris is so good with, because my clients will come and say, well, hey, so he's built now the decision matrix inside Trainual. So if you go use Trainual, the platform, the template's in there. You can plug it right in. My top 5 strategy page that I use when I work with strategic planning, he built that in because so many of my clients, they're like, well, he goes, oh, I'll just put it in there. So, the KPI metric thing comes up a lot, right? And so he's just added that as an add-on to the system. I don't know. I personally don't know of any standalone metric tracking. Again, I'm an old guy. I mean, I run an Excel spreadsheet with tabs at the bottom,
but they work. It
works. It works, and you always know where it is. It's not like which whatever you have to open to go into there. So yeah.
I appreciate that. So I know that you're heading to Boise towards the end of the summer, but what's next for you? Do you have another book coming down the pike?
No, I just had my 10-year anniversary. I can't believe that book came out. It came out in 2010, May of 2010. Well, I was asked about this probably like 3 years after it came out. And what I did start doing it, I was working with a friend of mine who was going to do it, and it just fell apart. But I was going to go and interview individual business owners who had used, a section of the book, the tools, and have them add a 2 or 3 page story about their experience with it and more takeaways to make it more real. So called, 40-hour work year realized kind of a thing. Yeah. And this gentleman I was working with was going to go and interview. I'd highlighted the 10 people for the 10 different chapters. And I think he got to the 3rd chapter and just didn't happen. So that would be something that might be kind of cool to do. I do talks on angel investing, but as far as a book on angel investing, it's such a unique niche. It'd be more of a handbook. It really wouldn't be a book probably. So.
Yeah. Awesome. I definitely want to make sure that our listeners know what the best way to connect with you online or how to follow you. Where should we send them?
Yeah, well, I say this in all my talks. Please, link in with me on LinkedIn. I love to connect people. I mean, I'm constantly amazed at how I can connect. I've got this side little story here, but I'm going to start working with next week 3 chapters in Eastern Europe, coaching them on a monthly basis. And the person that connected me with this found me on LinkedIn. So it's like Romania, Bulgaria, and I don't even know the other one. But anyway, it's an Ikistan of something. But I mean, these three entrepreneurial chapters are going to start working with me next week, and it was only because of LinkedIn. There was no other way they would have found me. So I tell people to connect with LinkedIn. You can always email me. It's scott@growthconnect.com, scott@growthconnect.com. Or you can go to growthconnect.com. All my stuff's on there. You can buy the book on there, and check. I got courses on there and stuff. So
fantastic. I'll include all those links in our show notes, and I highly encourage you picking up the 40-hour work year. It is fantastic, not to be confused by the 40-hour work week, right?
Yeah. Oh, and by the way, because it's my 10-year anniversary, I mentioned this. I have the online course, which is usually $99. Mm-hmm. It's on my site. If you go to growthconnect.com, you just click online course. It's only $10 for the rest of the year because I'm celebrating my 10-year anniversary of my book. So you can do the online. Fantastic. It's me talking, taking you through all the exercises of the book and everything for $10. It's at growthconnect.com. Or if you just type in 40hourworkyear.com, it takes you right to the online course.
Outstanding. Scott, thank you so much. I hope that if you have some extra time while you're in Boise that you'll swing by our offices. We'd love to say hi.
Yeah, sounds great. Thanks again for having me.